there is like a fair bit of democracy still going on. We think it's still in these countries feasible that despite this low level of corruption, opposition parties could still win, right? Joe Biden still actually has a reasonable chance of carrying the 2020 election, and yet under side proposition's definition, he would have to drop out of the election because there is reasonable suspicion that it's going to be a corrupt election, right? We just tell you this is a far, far worse scenario that exists in quite a lot of different countries across the world, where side proposition are forcing people to vote in another tyrannical government, or another government that wants to use corruption in its elections because they no longer have what would have otherwise been a really viable alternative, right? It's just 4 more years of Donald Trump. We also want you to bear in mind that this remains true for actually quite a large number of countries, because often electoral tampering happens even when a government doesn't totally control other institutions and doesn't have absolute power over elections, right? And I'll take a POI.
Okay, cool. So in a world where apparently governments and are always corrupt and they often don't get free and fair elections, what incentive do opposition parties have to continue protesting and campaigning?
Okay, we tell you that we give them a way better way of opposing a government, right? So why is this, right? Why do we still win this debate, even when opposition parties are successfully suppressed in an election? Because we tell you, firstly, the government now has a smoking gun in its hand, right? They have tampered in an election. That is a major crime that they have committed. At that point, if there are any independent bodies left within the country, which I think we've already told you why there will be quite a significant amount, that is the point at which courts, at which police are now able to investigate the government and potentially bring them down in a perfectly peaceful manner and prevent them legally from being in power, right? On side proposition's house, the government has never committed this crime, and thus there is actually no principled mandate to bring them down. There is no principled mandate to show that they are a really undemocratic government that needs to be brought down. Secondly, we tell you that opposition parties can still get elected in minorities to parliament, right? At that point, they're able to enact some kind of change that they're just unable to do, that side proposition has not shown us that they're going to be able to do under their side of the house. For better democracy, side opposition.
I thank the first op for their fine speech. Again, just give us a minute to finish up our notes and then we'll get started. Okay, great. I would now like to call upon the second proposition speaker to further the proposition case first in a speech not exceeding 8 minutes. Here, here.
Okay, cool. Cool, I'll be starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Speaker, I recognize that everything that opposition argues in this debate doesn't work. Why? Number one, the first idea that they give us in this particular debate is that opposition parties are stronger when they contest in elections, and because then they're given platforms to actually express themselves. This is the first misconception that you get from opposition in this entire debate. Why is this so? Recognize that when opposition parties continue to contest within those particular elections, number one, as Ruby tells you, they already legitimize whichever government is in power, right? This directly means and directly engages to the idea that they're not gaining any power for themselves. All they are doing is legitimizing people who are gaining false power. But secondly, and most importantly, recognize these people don't get any platforms to actually view out, to actually let out their views. The problem with the things that they argue, that these are things that exist in full out democracy democracies, not in half-baked democracies such as places like Zimbabwe, or places such as Namibia, etc., etc. So many of these African countries. Notice how in certain places you don't even see opposition parties on the TV. Why? Because even the media in those particular states is run by those particular oppressive regimes and those oppressive parties. We get no analysis whatsoever as to how these individuals still get a certain level of buy-in within society. That doesn't exist. Secondly, they argue on the entire side of the debate that no, they believe that opposition parties are bound to get stronger whenever they are registered as opposition parties. Recognize that in this debate on proposition, we're not saying like cancel out your registration and stop being an opposition party. That's not the chat. That's not the debate that exists in this particular round, right? What we're telling you is that these individuals should not contest in the particular elections because the elections are not democratic at all. So in their entire aspect of that debate is that people are supposed to get their democratic rights to vote. We think that you uphold, you think that you already don't have that democracy existing on their side of the house. Number one, because the elections are already not free and neither are they. The international community has no incentive whatsoever to like engage within those particular elections, and there's no incentive to try and backcheck those elections because they are viewed as legitimate. If you go back year after year after year after year, it means that as an opposition, you legitimize those elections. You also recognize those elections as proper and as fair. We get no analysis whatsoever as to how you go back for 5 consecutive years and continuously notice that these elections are rigged, but you still think that no, maybe next year it's going to be a better alternative. Speaker, we get no analysis of that. We think that that's unacceptable, right? Next thing, which is primarily more important for us to realize in this debate, is the importance of civil unrest when it comes to societal change. Speaker, when they tell you that civil unrest is a very, very bad thing, we think that then they go against so many things that have happened in the past. We talk about the civil rights movement that happened where civil unrest was caused. We talk about like places such as the Naxalities in India. We talk about the ZANL in Mexico. So many times the civil unrest has been used, but it has been used as a tool for societal change, a tool that has made sure that society changes for the better when it comes to political protest. We don't understand how civil unrest becomes a tool which is so problematic on outside of ours, where people's rights are oppressed. Because recognize the moment elections are not free and are not fair, that's not only an oppression of the opposition party, but it's an oppression of the people entirely. Before I go on, I'll take it beyond.
Okay. Do parties get the word out about corruption better when they're an official political party contesting a national election or a fringe group with no legitimacy?
I already answered this POI before you asked. Number one, we told you that these parties are not like going out and stopping to become political parties. Notice how even in instances where there are no votes, you still have political parties that exist for the purposes of representing people, right? But simply not partaking in the elections is what we're arguing for in this debate. So they still get enough societal buy-in, they still get work within like other spectrum. They simply don't participate in elections because they understand the fraudulent nature of those elections. Next thing that's important for us to realize, in an instance where parties do not take part in an election, what happens? Number one, we've got alarms within the International Criminal Court. Why is this so, right? Because within the international sphere, what they understand is that, number one, when certain parties don't partake within those particular elections, they are given direct incentive to investigate, right? With them investigating, they then understand the level of corruption that exists within those particular spheres. We're bound to have a better societal change on our side of ours. Second, Notice how reforms take place when like opposition parties do not partake in elections. Notice how like parties such as the NDC, when they chose not to partake, right, and they boycotted the particular elections. What happened is they ended up as a unified government because like the ruling party realized that the problems that existed whenever opposition parties don't partake become so large, and then there's a necessity for societal change and no reason for them to continue being corrupt. Next thing that's important for us to recognize is how certain voting turns out, right? Whenever voters do not reach a certain number of people for them to partake in an election, automatically that election is disregarded and not considered as legitimate. Maybe less than half of the population actually registers to vote, right? That is to say, if the opposition already has a larger buy into society, the moment they realize that they don't want to partake in the election, it means that whoever is bound to vote for that opposition will not register to vote. And when this happens, it directly means that the government is not recognized because they didn't have enough voter turnout. This directly means that you get the international court to come into those particular countries and to try and solve the problems that happen. Speaker, recognize that most of the things that they give you do not engage with the clashes that exist in this debate. Number one, we speak of legitimacy. If you partake within that particular election, it means that if you partake within that election, it means that you legitimize the outcome, right? You partake in an election for 4 consecutive voter turnouts and you partake every time. It automatically means that you have some sort of belief that it's going to be okay someday. This means that you contest the idea that the election is free and it's fair, it's okay, right? So you already legitimize it, right? Secondly, and most important, recognize that civil unrest and the things that happen, right, and the engagement of the international court, right, and the international community are very, very important. Because these are the things that cause societal change. These are the things that cause political change. We think that is the thing that we are happy to do and we're happy to have on our side of the house, especially when people strike at people face. Third thing that's important to realize is that you're bound to have, like, when opposition parties don't partake, you're bound to have the international court stepping in. And when it does, you're bound to have things like sanctions, etc., etc. When they realize that these elections are not free and fair, when this happens, this directly means that you're bound to have more societal change. The burden that opposition has in this debate is number one, to show us how these opposition parties, they continue to exist in those elections, how they're bound to create anything. Because I already showed you how historically no change has existed. Number one, the ZANL party, until it decided to boycott. Secondly, parties such as MDC and the Naxalities in India, etc., etc. All of these individuals have continued to remain as opposition parties in those instances, but no societal change has taken place. We get no analysis as to how that's different on their side of the speaker who beg to propose.
I thank the second opposition speaker for their final speech. Again, we'll get started very shortly.
Am I good to go?
We are just waiting for one more judge to confirm, and then I'll let you know when we can begin.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was ready a little while ago. I was checking the speaker's name and I ended up in their private chat as a result of that. So yeah, I'm going to fix that, but I'm ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so second op, you are free to begin whenever you're ready and continue the opposition case in the speech not exceeding 8 minutes. Here.
Is my audio clear? Okay, I prefer POIs said rather than written. Proposition support a policy which leads to the suicide of opposition parties. At worst, on opposition, we get to see the smoking gun of the state. My material is on why this creates a spiral of irrelevance for opposition parties. In order for them to live, they must participate in elections. But first, some rebuttal. First point of rebuttal, we want to engage sensibly on where these elections actually take place. Proposition have adopted a frame that's deliberately narrow. These elections must, by the motion, these elections, all they must be is not free and fair. This might include America. No, there's no reason to accept their characterization, which only includes countries where running is a futile endeavor. Two additional responses. Firstly, even in countries where running is a futile endeavor, like China, we think even 30% of the seats in their parliament are not the CCP, and they are able to accomplish small concessions. For example, accomplishes in relation to the Three Gorges Dam. So it's even under a limited capacity, they're able to make concessions. Secondly, Lapland already proved why this might apply to America, but additionally this could also apply to Hungary, which is an EU member with an authoritarian leader, South Korea, which has a party, Senuri, their last government, which is incredibly corrupt, or Brazil, where Lula is banned from running. We say, we buy Lapland's analysis more, since problems in the electoral process exist on a spectrum, Prop needed to engage with the more grey areas rather than just 100% corrupt. Second point of rebuttal. Is participation an endorsement? No, thank you. First, three responses here. Firstly, on a linguistic level, no, these are opposition parties. They're not necessarily endorsing. Secondly, most parties who boycott elections eventually participate again under the same broken electoral system. If Prop truly believe in this principle, they must denounce parties like the BNP in Bangladesh, which boycotted one election because it seemed corrupt. Then they participated in the next election, which was also corrupt. Does this party fit by their very high standards? We think probably not. Third response, the only ability for an opposition party to dissent is to join these elections. More new ways this becomes possible. No, thank you. This becomes possible because they can participate in debates and town halls relating to the election. Secondly, it becomes possible because there's more news coverage of official groups rather than fringe groups. Thirdly, parties get ballot paper access where citizens can learn about them if through the ballot paper alone. This is mutually exclusive. And finally, once a candidate gets banned from extremely authoritarian government, where candidates do get banned, there's an uproar more so than a boycott. Third point of rebuttal on international involvement. Where do we see more of that? We kind of just heard this asserted, from the first proposition speaker, that there's going to be more international involvement. There was no exemplification. We say that participating allows three things to happen that makes international involvement more likely. Firstly, there's an alternate leader compared to the authoritarian government if they participate in the election. There's actually someone who you can hand the government to. Secondly, there's likely to be diplomatic ties between like-minded organizations, for example, like different labor parties within different countries internationally collaborate. And thirdly, there's an outrage when the opposition party wins an election or gets more votes than the government, but they're not allowed in. Fourth and finally, civil unrest. No, thank you. Proposition didn't engage with our POI, where we asked whether news disseminates more when it's reporting on a national party or a fringe group. Second, we'd say that his point on civil unrest hinges on this news getting out in the first place. So at the point at which he says that this news doesn't get out, we say news is less likely to get out on a boycott than it is on an election, because there's like more national, because an election is actually nationally syndicated, the boycott is a fringe endeavour. Finally, civil unrest works best when accomplished with election. So if anything, this material supports our side of the house. We think that that material, if anything, is ours. On to my substantive, first a POI, yes please.
Okay, so do you think that when parties such as the Democratic Party pull out of the USA elections, will these things go on as normal, or will there be a lot of civil unrest in this course?
We think if the Democrats pull out of the election, like, they'll lose. That's what will happen. There might be some irregularities, but we think they forfeit any chance of winning that election. That's why we don't support that. My substantive on how this creates a spiral of irrelevance for opposition parties. We think many of these countries have hostile media environments to opposition parties. The press freedom isn't very high. So there's a slim number of opportunities for parties to raise their profile. So one of these opportunities is an election. An election is a fertile ground for these parties to raise their profile as major groups. There are two worlds we want to present to you, Chair. Firstly, a world in which the party boycotts. In a world where a party boycotts, there is zero chance of that party winning the election or placing or getting any seats in that country's parliament. They're banking on the election being fair by the next election. As we say, the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party in 2014 boycotted the election, lost all of their seats. They came back in 2018 and only got like 20% of what they originally had. The other world is a world in which these opposition parties run. A few things can happen in this world. We think, firstly, these parties might get banned, or these individuals might get banned. We see this have happened a bunch in Russia. Navalny and Kasparov have both tried to run for president of Russia. They got banned. This highlighted the corruption that's endemic to Russian democracy. This raised awareness more so than a boycott could have ever done so. If you're banned from an election, that creates far more headlines than saying, haha, I'm not participating in this election of my own free will. Secondly, you could run and succeed. We see this happened in the Gambia. Barrow was a person who was trying to defeat the corrupt government of Jammeh. He ended up getting more votes, and only because of international involvement, thanks to Senegal, as a result of that, he was able to be placed as the leader. This happened because he participated in the first place. Thirdly, you could have a boycott. Thirdly, your party could just lose the election, which we say is better than a boycott, because at least you don't destroy all of the support that you've been building up over the years. So let's walk through the process of how an opposition party loses relevance. We say, firstly, they choose to boycott. This means they end up not on the ballot paper any longer. Secondly, this means they lose all of their seats. Thirdly, this means that they get significantly less media coverage, because at the very least you'll have one national programme to say, here is the election that happened today, here's all the parties that participated, your party is not in that list if you boycott. Fourthly, what happens is by the next election, you will have diminished support even if you try to participate in the election again. Fifthly, you can choose to participate or boycott the following election. If you participate, you could turn out like the Bangladeshi National Party and have an 80% reduction in seats. And if you choose to boycott again, this could lead to even worse results down the line. This is how opposition parties, which are the only vehicle for dissent as left and established in many countries, die. Because we value dissent and because we value democracy, vote opposition. Thank you.
I thank the second opposition speaker for their fine speech. Again, we'll get started shortly. Okay, I now call upon the third proposition speaker to further the constructive speeches in a speech not exceeding 8 minutes. Here.
Am I audible? Perfect. Panel, recognize that in this debate, side opposition largely characterizes the status quo as bad. They concede to the fact that the status quo is bad. But it's surprising that they defend this very same status quo and assume that their policy is a magic wand that will solve and resolve things. Now that they've presented their 8 in these cases, we feel like there's strategic flaw in their case. You're going to hear my 3 speeches. 3 things in my speech. Firstly, the strategic flaws, and secondly, the clashes, and third, the uncontended issues, and show you why basically they were very important in this debate. On the strategic flaws, we think that their case is parallel to the context that we set in this debate, because we set this debate basically in oppressive regimes, where we think that when they talk about choice and all of those principles that they talk about in their side, we don't think that these are things that actually exist, because already the oppressive regime poses as a threat to these rights, something that you ought to note in this debate. Also, they come to tell us well that opposition parties are going to be stronger when they are registered as opposition parties. This is parallel to the meaning of the motion, because we don't think that you necessarily lose your voter status simply because, your opposition party status simply because you boycotted a certain election. We don't think that's true, ladies and gentlemen. They don't lose the status, right? But then they don't even show why their registration means that opposition parties are likely to lobby for some change, given the fact that they've tried so much in status. Parties actually guarantee some change. That is that you ought to note in this particular side, and that is already posed as a threat to this. Also, notice how their debate to spend school, and they consider these regimes are actually posing political patterns, which means that then at the end of the day, we don't see how then that actually solves their problem. We wanted them to actually prove how they are going to lobby for some change, given the fact that these oppressive regimes have actually captured everything, including the media. Then any alternative whatsoever to actually lobby for some change. Now, on the clash is how best to create a better society was the best. On the other side, they consider then thank you. They just tell us that well, these opposition parties can lobby some change and they can bring down these oppressive regimes peacefully. Notice how this is particularly hard because these oppressive regimes are in control of everything, including the media and the coast. We give you an example of the MPC in Zimbabwe, right? When they tried to actually lobby for some change and actually tried to appeal to the court, right? After they lost an election, but though they won that election, the constitutional court actually favored the oppressive regime, which shows how then it becomes hard for these people to assert themselves because everything is captured by these parties, right? But also when they come, they tell us in this discussion that they can get a platform to actually express themselves. Means literally told you how then this media is actually captured by these people, right? But also will give you that these parties have actually tried to form some form of change within the society, but then we tell you how then even this speech is actually punished by these oppressive regimes, which means that the discourse that you get from their side is actually limited because these governments are actually punishing that speech. And we think that the best way in which you can actually form a way in which you can express ourselves is to actually come out and define what has been and actually exists in society and actually use this as form of civil disobedience, right? In our side, we tell you how then this is a means to actually solve the problems by actually appealing to this to the international community, right? How is this effective? We tell you of the discourse that is bad, which means that then the moment whereby we have this international intervention, it means that then we can look for some change, right? This is something that's very, very important in this debate, right? On legitimacy, that is it. The second, it's possible to actually participate in this election. This argument about choice, that is to say that voting should be a choice and individuals should be able to vote, right? We don't think that this choice exists whatsoever because the right to actually to choose these political leaders has already been constrained, given that the polling results are likely to be channeled to one individual. That we are certain whatsoever that the ruling party is actually going to win, which means that is not whatsoever. This is not true. I'll take you.
How do you expect to bring about change when you defang the only movements for change in these countries?
Can you repeat once again?
How do you expect to bring about change when you defang the only movements for change in these countries?
Please rephrase once again. Please rephrase.
How do you expect to bring about change when you remove the only movements for change?
I know we've already explained that we are not actually wiping off these opposition parties in the political system. What we are simply doing is to say that we actually boycott these elections, which means that these opposition parties continue to exist, but then they don't participate in these elections because we think that it's principally unjust to actually fit into this system that they are playing. Because the point where they actually paint these elections as something that is very unfair, and at the same time participate in these elections, it means that then they actually legitimize these elections and prove in a certain message that all these elections are legitimate, which is something that we actually reject in our side. But moreover, on the present choice, we don't think that opposition parties have moral burden to actually maximize the choice. That's something that they ought to recognize in this debate, right? But we don't think that we diminish choice in any way in our side, because we tell you that also the choice to actually boycott these elections. If opposition people actually vote for the opposition party, feel like they're actually being misrepresented and choose to actually boycott these elections, I think that is also some choice that we should find this debate. That's something that's very, very important on our side. So we show you how basically choice to maximize on in this debate. Then on the uncontended issues, I'm going to tell you the uncontended issues in this debate and show you why they actually mattered in this debate. We tell you of the discourse that actually exists, right? Not taken, right? The discourse that exists, it means that then the international community, if it actually advocates for some change in this country, we think that we can actually see some form of change, because we think that in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, we failed, we have tried as these opposition parties to actually use the electoral system, but then we have failed because controlling political parties actually have captured everything, which means that these people have no alternative whatsoever. And therefore, because of the fact that they failed in the status quo, we think this is a means to actually this is a means of last resort to actually appeal to the international community. And we tell you how they actually patronizing social change. Because when we have actually discussed in the international community, it means that also in future electoral processes, it means that then we have more sort of intervention of the international community, and at the end of the day, we derive some change. So in that side, we expected them to prove actually how then they're actually going to amass this change that they talk about in their side, given the fact that the media, the political parties actually in control of everything. And therefore, in this debate, we think that the team that that is actually going to win this debate is the one that proves how best we actually reach a society whereby there's a balance. And therefore, we think that side opposition actually solves this problem. How to propose? Thank you.
I thank the third proposition speaker for their fine speech. And once again, just give us a second.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. And whenever you are ready, you deliver your 8-minute speech, 8-minute address to further the op case here.
I'm just going to take that as a yeah. I'm starting at 5. All right. Wait, what was that? All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One of the most extreme examples of sham democracies. Not only have we brought you a case that in the realistic setting of debate, the degree of decisions change, we also want a very authoritarian state. We judge firstly position, secondly about creating change in the long term in these countries themselves. I'm going to deal with each of them in turn. Okay, so first on opposition. This is incredibly important because it's the way to strengthen the democratic institutions and improve discourse on the whole within these countries, right? This is especially important in countries with less free media because this is the only avenue to dissent through a vocal opposition party. So let's look firstly at their main claim to these elections. 5 things. 1. The party call out electoral fraud under our side of the house. From within these institutions themselves, right? They likely have greater proximity, greater information about how it's being carried out. We think this allows them much better to call this up and have a bigger voice and be legitimized through their position in government, right? We still think these parties have a modicum of power. They are much more likely to get electoral institutions themselves speaking out when they feel there is a viable alternative to replace the government, which is conducting such electoral fraud. We think this results in the best degree of change. Alternative. Note that the opposition parties, by participating, haven't endorsed that election. You get very simplistic analysis from first speaking. We told you on the platform to advocate against electoral fraud, right? To spread the message that this has happened. The opposition parties endorse electoral fraud by participating in the elections themselves, or the opposition parties vocally saying, this is what is happening, right? This is the electoral fraud that's being conducted. We have seen this and we stand against it, right? This is an unintuitive assertion. We don't buy this. Secondly, domestic media is unlikely to call out electoral fraud on either side of the house, right? Because if they do, it won't be seen as a boycott, right? It will rather be seen as weakness because the media is often the first institution to be subverted. Let's look at the own BBC. Let's look at the BBC in the UK, for example, which ran campaigns against Jeremy Corbyn, right? We think that this is, even in international, this is much more likely to call out the subversion of institutions than the non-participation. Why? Because there is no evidence of fraud if the opposition drops out. It simply looks like a petty domestic squabbling in fledgling democracy. We think optics is everything when it comes to media, right? Real legitimacy, it lends real legitimacy to when they participate in democracy as it lends them the state legitimate party which participates, right? We think that if they are not in democracy, then they are not a party. They just fade into obscurity as another vague opposition. Thirdly, fake opposition. If government has such an insidious control of the mechanisms of the state, as Team Prop's material relies on, right? We tell you that it becomes very easy to set up a fake opposition to legitimize the election, right? Which is seen as legitimate from an international standpoint because the previous opposition has lended their space, has completely conceded their stance and space in favor of it. Right. We think that this can't happen when the existing opposition takes a stance against the government, as it's much harder to replace. Fourthly, we get no reason as to how legitimate elections mean that human rights abuses will be ignored. They just don't give us any meaningful analysis here, right? We still think, don't get away with this. We still think that whether an election is happened or not, they still maintain like the possibility to call this out. We don't think that there are actual harms from giving legitimacy to this election really stand. And finally, judges, if you take nothing else from our case, remember that Zimbabwe are the ones who allow the governing party to completely legally be the only party in their country. In Prop's best case, where all news gets out of corruption, all court they don't make it clear at all why any of their material so important, they don't actually even tell us what these states actually look like. Whereas Lacan tells us that these countries are realistically a scale, right? This looks like China on the very, very fringe case which Zimbabwe focuses on, where they have no fair elections, and it's very difficult for these opposition parties to actually gain legitimate power within this country. It looks like Venezuela, where it has some a case for the US. So thank you. Where it looks like voter suppression, gerrymandering, to imprison the other, right? We tell you that we went nation parties themselves are actually funding. Note that they cannot get to participate in democracy if they have no visible presence or any meaningful change. You once look at or how these bodies actually work. Ourselves from by bringing this problem. We're happy to be no change. Very marginal case. Onto the second one about creative.
So we sorry.
In Zimbabwe could give us a single example of how boycotting elections has led to meaningful and sustainable change is the perfect example of that. We think that to push this burden on us is fundamentally unrealistic and unstrategic in Zimbabwe, right? So peace is paramount in a good state, right? Instability does not lend to strong democracies, which we think the end goal of the debate is. Let's look at Iraq, El Salvador, Paraguay, all which were too unstable to maintain strong democracy in the long term. We think that Team produces in their success case a litany of failed states. They give us no reason as to why this doesn't happen. But let's get to the international punch. This looks like Guaidó in Venezuela, where we think coming from international bodies. We think this relies on participation. We think he participated in an election, though a coalition of the people themselves. We think this only happens when an opposition is seen as a viable alternative and therefore deserving of the support. Experience for this to happen, as they need to be accepted by the population around time. But let's go into the nuclear option. Like, they have to defend the United States, and why introducing civil rights, the main method of tackling even the final mildest corruption, is just utterly nuclear for no reason. Given that, like, free and fair doesn't apply to a vast number of elections, they seem to be advocating civil war, where corruption could be tackled through legitimate democratic processes if you can indict the government with electoral frauds and have some kind of democratic opposition. Crucially, because courts' inquiries often maintain intact and able to prosecute even when the government is corrupt enough to be tampering with elections, right? But even in the best case, maybe there will be some civil arrests if, like, the Democrat Party pulls out. But when the Republicans have control of the state apparatus and crush it, we think that this doesn't actually lead to them gaining real power. So we think they never engaged with our case. They stuck to a very fixed view of very marginal cases. How they even never told us what these opposition parties actually do instead of these elections. So for so the side that gives you a smoking gun instead of a suicide bomb.
I thank the third speaker for that fine speech, and we will soon move on to the replies. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to call upon the opposition reply to conclude the opposition case for us in a speech not exceeding 4 minutes. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Even in Team Zimbabwe's ideal world, where the hugely symbolic gesture of opposition parties standing down provokes outrage in the country and across the world, the only thing that any investigation or court is able to show is that there might have been corruption in the hypothetical situation that a balanced election had gone ahead. It was because side proposition manufactured legitimacy for illegitimate government that they couldn't win this debate. In this speech, I want to ask, firstly, which side in this debate made it less likely that a corrupt government can stay in power? And secondly, under whose side of the House does a corrupt government have less influence? We think both sides were side opposition. So firstly, let's ask who makes it less likely that a corrupt government stays in power. So proposition gave us one vehicle for removing corrupt governments in their world. This was just awareness of corruption that is provoked by this symbolic gesture of opposition parties standing down, and they hope that that will lead to civil unrest and international pressure. What did we tell you about this vehicle for change? We told you two things. Firstly, we told you that awareness is just so much less likely on their side because all they tell us is that these opposition parties are really entrenched institutions and that everyone likes them and therefore they'll get loads of legitimacy and everyone will listen to them, right? We tell you that that's just not necessarily true, right? We tell you that opposition parties might be a new thing in places like fledgling democracies, but we also told you that they just sacrifice so much legitimacy and so much clout when they stand down in this way, because they are no longer legitimate parts of the democratic system. They are just like parties that happen to be pressuring for certain things despite being unwilling to stand an election. We don't think that they have that kind of political capital under their side. But secondly, we just told you that civil unrest, meaning forceful and violent removal of an unwilling government, should be a last case, should be a last resort, not their only solution to even the slightest whiff of corruption. We think it's entirely unreasonable that they tell us that like their solution to the second an election looks like it might be corrupt is that they hope at some point they will provoke a civil war, right? We don't think that that is legitimate when we give you so many ways in which these issues can be resolved. What are these other ways? We gave you two different mechanisms for deposing governments. Firstly, we told you that you can just defeat them in an election, right? We gave you really solid analysis as to why it is that there exist lots of countries around the world where it is possible that the government is corrupt and making an election unfree and unfair, and therefore this comes under the scope of the motion, but it's also feasible that the opposition party just wins the election, right? We think it's unreasonable that side proposition just wants to instigate a civil war in those places. But secondly, we tell you about prosecuting a government in the aftermath of a corrupt election. We gave you a very simple comparative here that we've not had a reasonable response to. We, on our side of the House, we force governments into committing crimes in elections that can then be prosecuted by courts and inquiries that retain any kind of independence, versus on team proposition, where governments no longer need to stuff ballot boxes or restrict free speech because they are now the only people running in this election, right? Not only can they not be prosecuted for that, they're actually completely legitimate in returning to power because they won the election fairly, right? The best that opposition parties can do is speculate that election fraud might have been committed if they have run. This is not enough. This is not the kind of vehicle we are satisfied with on team opposition, right? But secondly, we ask, whose side of the House does a corrupt government have more influence on? And we just tell you that, like, on our side of the House, we told you why it is still the case that a minority party in a parliament, even in the National People's Congress of China, a supremely undemocratic country, these opposition parties, even when they are suppressed, still have some kind of power, are still able to throw spanners in the works of governments and don't allow them to have complete free reign. It's because we give you some kind of accountability and some hope for a peaceful solution of these kinds of situations that side opposition won this debate.
Okay, I thank the opposition reply for their fine speech. Now I'm just going to call upon the proposition reply to get ready to begin their 4-minute address. And speaker, whenever you are ready, you can go ahead and begin.
Cool. Speaker, it's very funny for an entire opposition bench to come into this debate and defend a system that has not been working for so many years. A system that for past centuries has failed the entire ideals of democracy, and apparently if we keep on using it, it's going to work one day. We think that was the funniest assertion we've heard so far. Second, recognize that whenever we engage in this particular debate, we give you a system that has been proven to work, right? Firstly, we gave you so many examples throughout this debate for the Nexalities in India. We told you about ZANL in Mexico. We've told you about Trinidad and Tobago in 1971, right? All of these things have happened so much that in places where elections were boycotted, they've happened to work to make sure that a functionality exists within those particular spaces, that even societal change is created and that political change is created. Furthermore, we've even told you about places where completely certain political parties have been removed simply because certain elections were boycotted. We've told you about countries that have ended up with unified political systems because of boycotting taking place. They run past all of these examples and say no, because they think that it won't work, it simply won't work. We think that that was unacceptable. Second, recognize that in this debate, right, we ask them a pure eye that no, like you consider the idea that there'll be irregularities the moment the Democrats, right, say that they're not going to participate in those particular elections. What happens then when these particular individuals don't participate? We've told you this so much in our speeches that whenever these individuals don't participate in those particular elections, what it then leads to is so much intervention, right? And this intervention is directly channeled towards making sure that elections do become fair and fair. Then you can host elections after that at the moment when you've made sure that corruption no longer exists. We find no incentive whatsoever as to participate in elections that won't work. The best case scenario that you get from their side of the house is that no, for some reason it's going to work, or these political parties are actually going to be called in or called out for being criminals and for not working in a proper way, right? Speaker, Robert Mugabe has been in power for 39 years. You've got individuals who have been in power for 42 years. These are the number of things that happen within status quo. We get no analysis whatsoever as to how in their worlds all of a sudden they get called out. Notice there's parties such as ZANU-PF which have been taken to court more than 15 times for being fraudulent in elections, and still no changes happened, but for some reason we're supposed to continue with these elections and expect change to miraculously fall out of the sky. We think that that's unacceptable, right? Next thing that we need to understand in this debate on why we win this debate, right, is that the biggest question that exists is who achieves more change on this debate, right? The biggest idea that you get from them is stick to status quo, you get some sort of change that we can pray for. On our side of the house, we give you these examples. Number one, we show you how historically boycotting is worked. Secondly, we show you how intervention by the international court already means that these parties are bound to change. Third, we show you how intervention means that future elections are going to be more credible, right? Fourthly, we show you how, like, in a world where you actually do boycott elections, you end up with parties such as ZANU-PF which end up forming unified governments because they are afraid of civil unrest and all of those things. Fifthly, we tell you that in a world where people are actually, where people's rights are not recognized and they are constantly like not seen to be, and they are constantly not getting the political parties that they vote for, it automatically means that there's no democracy, there's no peace, civil unrest is justified. Next thing that we've already told you in this particular debate, we think that the reason why we already places this debate in countries where it's so big, right, is because this is where most likely boycotting is needed and it's where we support it. But even in instances where Trump thinks that the elections is bound not to be okay, we just support him in not participating because it still raises the same awareness that we're fighting for in this debate. We think this awareness causes change in the trickle down in the future. Speaker, for one reason, the opposition loses this entire debate. They defend a status quo that has failed. For leaders who have been in power for 37 years. For Donald Trump, who finished his entire, term without being removed, even though certain individuals could prove that what he did was rigging the particular elections. They defend that status quo. We think that this was a very, very shallow stance to take, and we think they deserve to lose that debate. If you take away one thing from our side of the house, is that historically boycotting has worked. We think it's bound to work anyway. We beg to propose.
I thank the proposition reply for their fine speech, and I congratulate all the debaters for what was a wonderful debate. So now what's going to happen is, of course, the judges are going to be put into another deliberation room. You guys are free to have like a 10-minute break, or you can chat amongst yourselves, and we'll be back with the call and the OA as well. And thank you again for a wonderful debate.